Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
I'm Chris Clements.
And we are here in DC, and we've got
Loving it.
Drew.
Bond.
Drew Bond, this is
Second time.
Second.
Well,
No, it's third.
Is it third?
I think it's third.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah,
All right.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And-
Thanks for
and-
having me.
And
Wow.
Drew is with C3 Solutions, which is a, would you call it a think tank?
Yeah.
Yeah, a conservative think tank that looks for conservative solutions to environmental issues. Is that
Well said. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Well, in a previous episode, we were talking a little bit about the Maha movement and the issues of the environmental impacts on health, and how Teddy Roosevelt kind of was as a Republican, we were the party of conservation.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that has not been the case as much, but I think it's coming back.
Yeah, I
Right?
think so. I think, we like to think groups like ours are helping with that. I think farmers are actually the first environmentalists.
Yeah.
They know how to steward the land. They know how to care for their resources. And somewhere along the way, the environmental community kind of, owned the language, and many conservatives just sort of resisted talking about the environment, talking about climate. And that's actually why we started. It's like, look, the United States of America, Americans, and really the world needs free market believing people engaged on these issues that care about the environment in a way that puts people first, that doesn't sacrifice people in the name of the environment.
Right.
And so to your point about Roosevelt, Roosevelt and the early farmers, right? They know how to steward the environment, and somewhere along the way, we just kind of lost our narrative on that.
Well, I think part of it is that for whatever reason, the environmental movement was captured a little bit by the zero population crowd.
Yeah.
And it became basically anti-human. So
Yeah.
it was, you should not be out there at all.
Well, anti-progress too, anti-technology, anti-just civilization.
Which is bizarre, because it's technology that's going to get us through all these things, right?
Right.
The technology is what's cleaned up the environment significantly. When you talk about how we've not only is it, we're not, coal is down, but even if we're using coal, it's cleaner. We've got ways to produce power that's cleaner than it was in the past. My dad talks about, growing up, and he grew up near a steel plant, and he'd wake up in the winter and be walking to school, and it was just a black soot all over the snow. Well, that doesn't happen today.
Yeah.
So clearly we've made progress.
Yeah, and that's where we actually, one of the reports that we write on a regular basis is called "Free Economies Are Clean Economies."
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, but I feel like we can't talk about it enough globally, because it's like economic freedom leads to a cleaner environment, and actually economies that are free are twice as clean as economies that are unfree. So really the choices going forward are, do you want to look more like North Korea or South Korea? Do you want to look more like East or West Germany in the past? If we talk about helping the global South, so to speak, people that are economically on the lower rungs of the ladder and in the poorest poor of the world, what they need is energy. They need access to energy that's affordable, abundant, reliable, and clean.
Yeah.
And so to your point about even coal, America has the cleanest coal in the world. And so while China's parading itself on the global climate stage as being a leader on these issues, they're building a coal-fired power plant every week or so.
Yeah.
And while they're investing in, minerals and mining globally based on their Belt and Road Initiative to own the supply chain. And so we've seen this play out where China comes in, floods the market with their own technologies in the name of, clean, or in the name of whatever. And where America just needs to take that back. We can't own all of our supply chains, but we ought to be supply chain really partners with key countries. And the reason I go into supply chains is because, as you know, it's like, well, energy is about making things.
Yeah.
It's about providing real products for real people. And you need to mine the minerals, you got to process the minerals, you turn it into something, whether it's a solar panel, a wind turbine, a medical device, military applications, or what have you. All of those things, like energy is like not a vertical, it's like a horizontal.
Right. That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a great way to look at it. Not a vertical, it's a horizontal.
Yeah.
Yes, it's always amazing to me that we want to do all these, invest in all these new technologies, but we don't want to use the resources that we have in abundance in our own country,
Yeah.
and we fight it. I
Yeah.
mean, we have a perfect example in Arizona with the Rosemont mine. It's
Yeah.
been in the planning stage or the permit stages for 20 years,
Yeah.
if not longer, and finally is, you know, getting over those hurdles.
This
But
is the
it's like we need
biggest
copper
issue.
in this country. We can't
Yeah.
just import copper all the
Yeah,
time.
I mean, we need a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, you put your finger on it. It's like if it takes you 20 years to build something in the United States, where China can build it in a year or two,
Yeah.
what are we doing?
We're ceding our dominance into different areas to China and to foreign entities, and it makes no sense.
Yeah, yeah.
What changes have you seen? I mean, the last time we talked was pre-2024 election. What changes have you seen with the new administration that are positive? Anything that's negative when it comes to, the free market, clean environment movement?
Yeah. I mean, well, for one, I mean, President Trump couldn't have found a better Secretary of Energy. Chris Wright, I know Chris. Chris actually wrote a foreword for one of our reports, our Free Economies report back in 2023. I mean, he's a geologist, he's a scientist, he's a businessman. And so just to have that practical leadership on our energy agenda is key. And then you've got over in the Department of Interior, you've got Governor Burgum, and then at EPA, you've got Lee Zeldin. So I think those three are kind of the trifecta of like energy pragmatism. And then, President Trump issued this declaration of emergency for energy, which I know many in the world were scratching their heads, like, how does the U.S. have an emergency for energy when they're so abundant with all their resources? But the emergency is getting back to that point if it takes 10, 20 years to build things in the United States. And so if you read
To
that,
streamline the process,
Yeah.
and also cut out the litigation piece,
yeah,
which is why that Rosemont mine has been in limbo forever. It's been litigated to the hilt.
yeah. I mean, this is like the irony of the environmental movement is that the environmental movement, they're actually preventing us from protecting the environment,
environment.
AKA
Yes.
the climate, because they
Well,
use
there's
it.
business interests that do it too. I mean, I was serving on the local economic development corporation at that time, and 25 years ago, and they voted against the Rosemont mine. I'm like, this is, how could you do such a thing?
Yeah.
Well, it's because the radical business elements and environmental elements within the board were against it, and also congressmen like Raul Grijalva and other people who, were not for that type of development were against it, and they didn't want to cross him.
Yeah.
And those are the things that Trump seems to be fighting back against.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think he has no patience for any of this. I think, as I've said, I've met with a number of members of Congress on this. I'm like, all of DC, it's a bunch of lobbyists worried about, who's going to get the money.
Yeah.
None of this money matters if we can't fix the permitting.
Yes.
And so, like, if we did one thing and one thing only, like if we could accelerate permitting so that you could build things faster in the United States, whether it's pipelines or solar farms or, pick your technology, it doesn't matter. We've got to be able to build here in the United States. Otherwise, China will build everywhere else in the world and in our backyard in South America. So, that is like the number one thing. And so that requires Congress to act. It requires Congress to act on things like tort reform, so legal reform. So you've got, what I was proposing to these members of Congress when I was with them recently is I like, look, you get a license in the United States to do business when you set up a business, right? And that license effectively says you'll abide by the law. And then you're allowed to go do business without asking for the government's permission every day, right? And then if you break the law, well, you're going to get penalized for it. Why should energy projects be any different?
Great
Like,
point.
why do you have to, Mother May I, ask for permission on every single project and give the environmental community years to litigate these things when it ought to be like innocent before proven guilty?
Yep.
Like, okay, I've got site control. I have the land rights for this project. There's already environmental regulations for the air and for the water, and so I can't pollute. If I do, I'm going to get in trouble. So let me go build my solar farm. Let me go build my pipeline. Let me go build my small modular nuclear reactor. Why do we have to do this to ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great point. What was the reaction of the Congress when you pitched this?
I mean, there was a lot of agreement in the room. I'll say, it was encouraging. There were 17 members of Congress, 9 Democrats, 8 Republicans, broad bipartisan support on the need to fix permitting.
Yeah.
We'll see if they actually, can get it done in Congress and kind of get past the politics. But, I would say there was broad agreement on that point. There was one question was, well, I suggested like, look, you ought to be able to get a permit. If you have to get some new permit, it ought to be able to get it done in a year, no more than a year. And they were like, well, can we really do it in a year? I'm like, well, why not? Like, it's like, it's our construct. So
Yeah.
let's reconstruct it.
Well,
Yeah,
that's the thing. And it really is. It is something that Congress needs to do because Congress ceded so much of that authority to the rulemaking process for decades.
Yeah.
That the bureaucracy was entrenched in making their jobs, more important. So, well, you have to have this process because, I mean, Congress has been so derelict in its duty for so long that when it writes legislation, it doesn't get into the specifics. It just says, oh, well, the agency will figure out the details. No, the Congress needs to direct the agency. Otherwise, the agency is going to go crazy, which they've done.
Yeah.
Because they overcorrect out of whether it's nefarious players inside the agency or they're just trying to cover their ass, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just they put too many strictures around these things to create a stalemate.
Well, that's where like I don't know why Congress couldn't pass all right, maybe you need 5 pages, but 1-page bill that basically says all energy projects in the United States are deemed approved unless they violate the Clean Air Act or unless they violate the Clean Water Act, right? Otherwise, like, let's just get this stuff done.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and that's what we were talking to them about is like, why not issue a categorical exclusion in the environmental community? They call them Cat X's, but a categorical exclusion that says, all right, any pipeline in the United States that's built with, existing standards is approved. And maybe, maybe the public has 60, 90
lose
days.
their minds.
Yeah, and but again, this
Which
is
wouldn't be a
like,
bad thing.
okay, if you want to solve
Not that they
the
had their
climate,
minds to begin with.
yeah. And this is where I'm like, I have these conversations with my environmental friends. I'm like, if you think that climate change is the most important issue that we have to solve in our lifetime for the future generations, then we can turn out all the lights, hope for the best. That doesn't work too well, right? We can go fast nuclear. Well, the environmental communities oppose nuclear historically for decades, or we can go as fast as possible on innovation. And so, like, you can't have your cake and eat it too on these things. Like, if this is the biggest issue, and you don't want to, you want to solve the climate by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, by accelerating energy innovation, and not ceding that ground to China. Like, we've got to get these environmental regulations out of the way.
What is the crux of is the environmental movement's opposition to nuclear energy because it solves a problem that they then can't fight, or is it because they really don't think it's safe or environmentally friendly?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not an expert on this. I think people have probably studied this and written about it, but my guess would be it was partially the environmental community worried about the waste, partially the non-proliferation community worried about the threat of, a nuclear war and a catastrophe. It's interesting. I mean, while we were fighting about what to do with the waste in Nevada when Senator Reid was alive and he, opposed it, And so we could, even though the geologists, so this is where the scientific community said this
Follow
is
the
the best
science.
place to be, and yet, no, can't put it there. And so as a result, we didn't have it in Nevada where geologists said it should be. We had it in 100 locations at
where it
every
shouldn't
nuclear
be.
power plant across the United States.
Right.
And so this is where like the unintended consequences of policy matter. And so when you look at fast forward to today, like, all right, historically, nuclear energy is the cleanest, the safest form of energy we have on the planet in terms of baseload power. And when you think about these small modular nuclear reactors, well, it's not really a new technology. We've actually been doing this for years in the form of nuclear submarines.
Yeah, I was going to say, the military's been having, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
They're all over the globe.
Yeah. So the question is like, can you make them economical and at scale? And so part of what the business model here is, instead of building, mega, gigawatt reactors that are billions and billions of dollars, build small, 10, 20, 30, 200 megawatts, whatever the size might be, and build them in a factory so that you can modularize them and repeat them. And then some of the newer technology is what is considered to be walk-away safe, to where like if there's a human error, the worst thing that happens is the plant shuts down.
Yeah.
And so like X Energy, for instance, is a company that's out there. They've got a big partnership with Amazon. Amazon's invested $400 million in X Energy. You've got Microsoft partnering with 3 Mile Island to restart that. So I think to the environmental community's credit, most of them, not all, many of them have come around and said, look, we really have to get nuclear restarted in the United States, or we're never going to be any kind of emission reduction capable.
Well,
I
not
think
only that, but when you look at what the energy requirements are for AI,
Yes.
I mean, that is, I mean, I don't know whether Trump was thinking about that when he signed the executive order talking about this declaring an emergency, but we are in an emergency.
Yeah.
Because if we're gonna keep up or stay ahead of China on AI, we are way behind on the energy production that's needed to power this stuff. Which is, to your point, why Amazon, why Microsoft, or why these other big players are investing in energy companies and trying to get this stuff off the ground, because we're going to need more.
Well,
and
I
more.
mean, look at all the news that's coming out of Arizona right now with all the data centers and the chip factories. Where would those be without the Palo Verde nuclear power plant? Couldn't happen.
It wouldn't be in Arizona.
It wouldn't be in Arizona. It's
Yeah.
just it's not even a.
But
wouldn't even be a thing.
but even APS, if you kind of dig in, they're years behind where they need to
where
be
they want to be
on producing enough energy to meet the demand. I mean, the queue for data centers in Arizona is years now.
Yeah, this is a real challenge. We've got energy demand from AI data center growth. And I forget the numbers exactly, but it's something like our energy growth in the past decade or so was maybe like 4% or something. In the next decade, it's projected to be like 30% growth. It's astronomical growth for energy. And when you look at, all right, we need to build all these data centers. We need to provide all the energy that they need, which has to be baseload power, has to be reliable power. So it's going to have to be things like natural gas or coal or nuclear. But then the challenges are we're abundant with natural gas, but we're not abundant with natural gas compressors, turbines.
Right.
So turbines are on back order until the early 2030s. Nuclear, we got great nuclear technology, we've got great nuclear resources, but even these small modular reactors or even the big, light water reactors, nothing's going to come online again until the early 2030s. So then you look at, well, what other resources do we have? Geothermal is hot and pun intended, but it's still not, like it's at scale. It's scaling in 1 or 2 locations, but it's got to scale in like hundreds of locations to be able to meet the data center demand. So it's actually solar and batteries that are off the shelf right now that can meet that demand. but you also have to take up a lot of land to deploy that kind of solar resource for, to match with the data center. So you're going to have grid connection. We do have excess capacity on the grid. The grid is capable. But you can't just, like, as much as I love small modular nuclears, again, they're not really going to be ready until the early 2030s.
Yeah.
Same for natural gas, turbines. So I think one of the things this administration is doing, this Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, the Department of Energy issued a request for information. They're looking at taking the land that the Department of Energy manages for us taxpayers, called national labs. So there's 17 national labs around the country. They all almost all of them have a lot of land, more than they can effectively use. All of them are grid connected. All of them have guns, guards, and gates, because they're part of our scientific and kind of energy future. And so those could be places where you could co-locate data centers and energy and have an accelerated permit to do so. You could also look at military bases. I mean, there's over 400 military bases, I think, around the country. Previous administrations have kind of done this, but it was more about proving technology. This RFI, and I think what this administration is looking at doing, is how do we scale proven technology and just do it faster.
That's a great point.
And do it in places where we know we can protect it, number one.
Yeah.
And we can scale it.
Yeah. I mean, you think like Oak Ridge. So I'm on a panel next week with Congressman Fleischman from Tennessee. He represents Oak Ridge National Lab, right? So they've got a ton of land. The beauty of the labs is, historically, they were created to make the atomic bomb that ended World War II, right? So then they became these research hubs and really kind of looking for their next big thing. The next big thing actually might, in fact, be the data centers, and how they can help us scale data centers and the energy that goes along with it.
Yeah. Well, we know you don't have a lot of time, but also I wanted to make sure that we talked about something that's near and dear to your heart, and something you were at the White House the other day to engage in, and that's being a foster parent and foster care. And I saw your post, I think 2 nights ago, and I basically insisted that you come on our podcast, because I was like, you've got to come and talk about this. And you were at the White House with the president, and they had a bit to do. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, so the president declared this month National Foster Care Awareness Month. We've been foster parents for 20 years.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of kids come in and out of our house, and sometime for a day and sometime for 9 months, and we've adopted 2 of them. So our 2 youngest that were pictured in those pictures that we got at the White House, we adopted those through the foster care system. So I think about those pictures, and when you have foster children, to protect their privacy, you don't share pictures. So in some ways, these are really faceless, nameless children. And there's like 400,000 of them around the country who have been placed in foster care because their home where they were, they had an abusive parent or parents. Oftentimes drugs is involved. There's addiction, there's mental health. It's all kind of a terrible cocktail. And so the kid gets removed, placed hopefully in a safe foster family temporarily. And the goal is always to get the child back to the parent.
Yeah.
And so if the parent is, getting clean and doing what they need to do, and it's not always drugs, but it often is. But if the parents are doing what they need to do, then they get the child back, right? And so we have some wonderful success stories where, we're still in touch with a few. And one went to college, got married, and, still follow her on Facebook and Instagram. Others that, got adopted by grandparents, others that got adopted by other family members, and kind of anywhere in between. But so I'm just grateful for President Trump and the First Lady to bring awareness to this issue, because when we started 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of people, especially in the faith community, doing this. But I think the church has kind of woken up to this real need, and so now we actually have resources around us that we didn't have back then. The group that got us those tickets to the White House is a group called Project Belong. And they're based in Northern Virginia, and they're here to kind of help steward the families that are the foster families. There's other groups called Foster the Family,
Yeah.
because when you take in foster children, well, your whole family dynamic changes, and so it's not just the parents, but it's the children that are there already. In our case, we have 4 biological children and 2 adopted, and so our 4 biological children have grown up with foster kids through the years, and that's impacted their lives. And so to have these other types of kind of para organizations to come around you and just provide support and things has been great. But it's one of the things that, I think in that post I wrote, and I've told people, like, look, I can't believe it's been 20 years. But I look back at the decision, and it was credit to my wife who wanted to first do it. But we just kind of took the first step, right? It's like in life, and every hard thing that you look back and realize, oh, I climbed this mountain and I didn't think I could.
Yeah.
You just take the first step, and God is faithful in providing resources and all that you need along the way. So anyway, it was a fun event. We got to see Marine One take off, and the kids enjoyed it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, God bless you for doing that. I mean, it's such an important thing, and something that I think not enough people think about or even engage in. And so we appreciate what you're doing on that, drawing awareness to it. But not only that, but just doing it. That's the most
Well, and
important.
also being recognized for it too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, and it takes a lot of faith, and it takes a lot of just being aligned with God. I think when things get a little bit difficult, and I know they have. So, and God bless you for doing
Yeah,
it.
thanks.
Yeah.
No, thanks. Again, thanks for bringing awareness to it, because I think a lot of people think about it, but then they think, oh, I could never do that, or now's not the right time, which is what I thought in the beginning too. Like,
Sure.
I think I told you my wife and I first thought about it, and it was like we had 3 kids in a 3-bedroom house with a big job, and I was like, now's not the right time, and but we were like, okay, well, let's just take the first step. And
Yeah.
so I would just, again, encourage people, if you've ever thought about it, please just take the first step, go learn about it. There's such a huge need, such a huge need.
Well, thank you, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks so
Such
much, Drew.
Short
Hey.
notice, and thanks for what you're
Always
doing.
a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. God
Take care.
bless. Thanks for listening.